Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So, let me start with an amusing story. I have to admit to you that my parents got air fryer before I did, and they kept on telling me about how great it is and what kind of recipes you can do. And my father said you can make a steak in it, but I didn't believe them. I didn't believe that it would taste better or that it's a superior way to cook food. But the thing is, so you might say that I was a late adopter, but the thing is, the air fryer actually came out in 2006. It was brought out by Philips. So in a way, we were all late adopters because I think, air fryers only really took off over the last 8 years. So what changed? I think customer needs changed. Living spaces got smaller, concerns about healthy eating increased, more people were cooking for themselves. Um, and not for their whole families. The air fryer was a convenient solution. So you might ask yourself now, why am I talking about air fryers? Well, one of the case studies in our recent white paper on product validation is Shark Ninja. They didn't invent the air fryer, but they're now the number one brand in America in that category. They launch 25 new products per year, shaped by the observed behavior of real customers. And that brings me to the tension at the heart of today's live discussion. Product validation has become cheaper, consumer signals are more visible, and yet hit rates in CPG haven't magically improved. So, what's actually going on there? With us today, we have Tassilo Henneke from ITONICS and Simon Rain from Trend Hunter. Tassilo, can you tell us a bit more about your area of work?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for sharing this interesting story, Rousseau. Uh, I'm not sure how many people can relate to that story, but I need to admit I can because my grandma, she had an air fryer 15 years back, and I nearly forgot about air fryers. But 3 years ago, my brother-in-law, he also bought one air fryer from Shark Ninja, and he was so convinced and so wowed by the air fryer that he tried to convince me as well to buy an air fryer. So very interesting story of how innovations develop over time, and that's also part of what we will discuss today. About me, I work at ITONICS, and ITONICS is a platform to discover, decide, and deliver what's next. So managing new products, new technologies, and innovations. I personally have a background in innovation management, did my PhD on innovation management, and I'm always interested to see how innovation management practices develop, new approaches, new tools, and I'm so curious that I also like to write and speak about innovation management practices and how they develop. And yeah, that's why I'm happy to be here with you and Simon and discuss how this plays out in the consumer goods industry.
Awesome. Thank you, Tassilo. Wow. Who knew that your grandmother would be the trendsetters in our lives? Okay, Simon, so can you tell us a bit more of what you're involved in there at Trade Hunter?
Yeah, 100%. Firstly, thanks for having me today. I too was late to the air fryer game, probably in the last 12 to 18 months. So behind the curve for someone that works at Trend Hunter. And, here at Trend Hunter, we think that, the best innovation happens when intuition and data can work together. So that's what we want to do for our clients. Our clients are some of the biggest brands out there in the world. We have AI-powered tools for trend intelligence. We have advisors to help people get clear, validated opportunity ideas. We do workshops, keynote presentations. We have an event called Future Festival. We're getting into the validation space with Survey Fast for rapid, statistically robust consumer testing. So if you like, we're an end-to-end innovation provider. But what's interesting, and I think we're going to lean into in this conversation, is that innovation isn't created equally. We see great successes, but as we've talked about in the sort of setup for this, we're seeing a lot of misses. And part of that, I believe, is down to a changing in the way in which people are validating. Certainly technologies reduced the cost and made innovation capacity better, but maybe those permissions to innovate more didn't come along with that. So excited to dive in and give some perspective. I'll hand it back to you, Russell.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, so before we dive in, I'm gonna ask the question to the audience. If you're watching us, you can give your answer in the comments. And the question is, where does validation usually happen in your organization? Is it A, discovery? Is it B, business case? Is it C, prototype? Is it D, just before launch? E, is it after launch? F, or is it never? So add your comment for what's the reality in your organization. All right. So both ITONICS and Trend Hunter, we work closely with innovation teams, and we see a paradox. Teams are more sophisticated than ever. There's more data sources. Tools are smarter, but having a successful product isn't getting easier. So let me ask my first question to you two. Here's the question. If validation is getting cheaper, faster, and more scalable than ever, why aren't we seeing dramatically better hit rates in consumer packaged goods?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So I'm definitely interested to see how many will respond with "we validate never" or maybe just occasionally. Let's see how that survey goes. But in regards to your question of the hit rates, so I think the hit rates per se are not that bad, particularly when you look into small improvements. So every season you see new flavors, new chocolate bars coming up, different cleaning products. So there's a lot of variations with new small improvements. But the real question is, when was the last time that we saw a true innovation and something that changed our behaviors as consumers? And I think that's it where it's getting a little bit tricky. And you might remember when the AI hype started, there was a famous post on LinkedIn saying, I do not want that AI is doing my writing. I do not want AI is doing my thinking. What I want is AI doing my laundry work. And that kind of reflects the need also from consumers for innovative products. So now coming back to your question, what could be the reason for why we are not seeing better hit rates in terms of true innovations? I think it has a lot to do with the kind of stability of the industry and also a little bit with missing pressures, at least from a consumer perspective. And with that also leading to a risk averse situation. So with playing safe, you can do economically quite good, but there is not much more ambition to grow beyond that. But here comes now the trick. We are talking about validation and validation getting cheaper. So with validation getting cheaper on the one side, and on the other side, companies trying to play it safe, disruption is just around the corner. And therefore, I think what companies need to think about is who owns the innovation mandate, particularly in organizations that are typically product line driven and regionally organized. Who has the mandate for bringing that forward and yeah, really working on that? Because as said, disruption is just around the corner. And on the other hand, the validation getting cheaper also offers new opportunities for growth. And that's the true question here, I would say.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that, Tassilo. I think what we're seeing from a validation perspective is that a lot of teams are still focused on execution. So they're not really thinking about validating demand. And they're certainly not thinking about validating that demand early enough. So whilst validation has become cheaper, it's become easier in many respects, where it's actually being applied hasn't changed. So teams are very often still validating an idea when it already exists. And the demand risk is not really being discovered until potentially you're too far down the street. So I guess the challenge is, how do you validate where the opportunity actually lies? So a timing issue, and we'll probably come back to timing in some of the next questions and discussion. But that's, I think, where we're applying validation for me is key.
I see. Okay, so it's about you're both talking sort of about risk and the timing of it, and that there's sort of a safe area to play. But okay, let me get to the next question. So to you, what type of validation creates confidence inside your organization, but doesn't actually reduce market risk?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably carry on from what I was talking about there. Anything that optimizes an idea after it's been decided, instead of challenging whether it should exist at all. And I guess that's kind of calling out like concept testing, surveys, internal decks. They can all increase your confidence, but they're probably just confirming a direction versus questioning it. And I guess validation, in essence, is supposed to reduce uncertainty. But the danger is that it could just be becoming a very sophisticated way of killing ideas. Right? Are we potentially, validating in the wrong areas? Are we validating things too late? And are we, validating to the point where a great idea isn't given the air to breathe and the potential to meet?
I think, Simon, you're outlining the situation pretty nicely, how it's currently done and also the challenges. And maybe on top of that, to the question of how we validate, not only at what stage, but also in terms of the mechanisms that are applied. I think typically it's always tried to be as rational as possible, collecting as many information as possible, weighing pros and cons. And that typically happens on the idea side. As you said, discovery might be a little bit of an afterthought, but it's typically happening on the idea side. And particularly when you want to move fast, make fast decisions, there might not be the time to collect all the information about whether this idea really hits a market need. So the question is then, what's the alternative if you do not have real-time intelligence about the market, how that develops? And typically the answer is it's based on gut feeling, it's based on power, it's based on what's kind of known. And that makes it quite hard also in terms of true innovations to be prioritized over smaller improvements, known improvements. And that's an interesting situation right now. But I think there's also change happening already, as you described, with AI, intelligent tools, also trying to combine expert opinions, finding expert opinions that are spread across the company. So you need to know who is an expert in what field. And that's typically quite tough for an idea, but also to validate an opportunity. But now with the recent developments, I definitely see a change in how validation happens, more towards supported by AI capabilities, connected to market needs, and that will change how opportunities are validated, and then later on also how ideas are validated.
Okay, that's interesting. And what you said earlier, Simon, I hadn't even thought of the possibility that validation could almost be used as a negative tool inside an organization where they go in with almost a bias that they wanted to prove or to shut down a particular product idea. But so then what are the good new sources of information from the market and consumer needs? So my question is, what are real demand signals forming today that traditional research still doesn't capture fast enough?
Oh, we've got to stand off, but I can go. Listen, I think it's behavior. Right? We really need to understand what people are doing, not necessarily what they're saying. Opinions are fantastic. Like we can get a lot of information. We can get quite granular based on somebody's opinion of a product or a service or a situation. The algorithms, creators, search behavior, what people are hacking together in real life, like the sort of unfiltered real worldness of life in 26 and beyond. That's what we're really trying to get to. So, validating people's behavior versus what they just say. And I think these are the early demand indicators. This is where stuff's like organically bubbling up and we're starting to see it gain traction. And the reality is for a lot of Trend Hunter and ITONICS customers that are pretty large, it takes them a long time takes them a long time to do things. So being able to continuously validate consumer behavior, I think is key. And I think that is something that traditional research is potentially just too slow at doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
couldn't. Yeah, sorry, Rousseau. I just want to say I couldn't agree more with what Simon said. In terms of what's the best validation mechanism, I think observing behavior, not letting people speak about how they behave, but really seeing it and then thinking about, okay, what does it actually mean in terms of how a product should behave and is used? That's kind of the key ambition that companies should always aim for. But here's the problem then. How do you do that at large scale? I mean, you can hire thousands of people going into homes of customers and seeing how they behave and use their products. But that's completely unrealistic, right? Because then you would end up with a complete inefficient organization. And the question is how companies can observe and understand behavior without sending people. And one example maybe everyone can relate to is vacuum cleaners. So because I mean you use vacuum cleaners, and then at some point they are full of dust, full of hair. You start using a scissor, trying to cut off the hair so that it's working again. But would there be a situation where a customer would call a service agent and saying, "Yeah, that's complete bullshit. That's not how I want it to be worked." So instead, people find workarounds and just live with it. But that's the true opportunity here. And I think also in terms of how to solve that, Simon already mentioned AI capabilities and things, but of course also sensors, using sensors and seeing those signals and understanding those signals could be quite attractive, and we will see that much more often in the future to develop new products.
That's cool. Yeah, what you spoke about there, Tassilo. And I guess that features quite prominently in our white paper, this idea about um, people won't necessarily tell you what they need, but you can, through observing their behavior or even through digital sources or social media or other data sources, get an understanding of what their needs are, even if they can't articulate it themselves. What's that line again from Ford where he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse? Okay, let's go on to my fourth question. So markets develop in weeks, organizations develop in years. How dangerous is that mismatch in CPG today?
Yeah, I go first. I think the most famous answer in business is always it depends. But to answer your question more precisely, um, I think it's okay when markets and organizations develop in different rhythms. So because if you would chase every trend, again, you would end up with a very inefficient organization, decision paralysis. You didn't know what to do at all. If you don't hunt for any trend and if you don't react to any market change, you would end up losing market share. So it's pretty easy. But the key point here is what you need is that, yeah, I think Simon said it also, in terms of discovery, understanding what market signals are real and which are just hype. So prioritizing what's hot, what's not, what's important, what's not important. That's the key thing here. Having good prioritization mechanisms to carve out good opportunities from bad opportunities and acting upon that. So you do not need to hunt every trend, but you need to understand how they develop over time and what's really important.
Yeah, I think prioritization is key, but there's no shortage of data. There's no shortage of inspiration. There's no shortage of good ideas. Like, I think, most innovation teams would agree that there's lots of ideation going on. The question is, which ones are you going to act upon? Validation is part of the process of making that decision. And again, I think it comes down to timing. If markets are developing super, super quickly and that your organization is going to take a long time to catch up, is it dangerous? I mean, it does depend. I agree to say, but it could be existential, right? this could signal the end of your business, or at least a lot of missed opportunities. And it kind of frames timing as one of those risk factors. I think risk management is part of what we're discussing here. But understanding priorities, like which are you going to chase, timing being key. And I think the other piece to sort of recognize is that you need to continuously validate. Like when we validate in a phase or stage gate process, we're doing this as a little bit of a checkbox exercise. So I think if we can get a practice or a structure or a culture around continuous validation, we put ourselves in a better situation to act.
Okay. And it's relevant what you say there about the checkbox exercise, because and it relates to what I want to ask you next, which is about the difference between validation as like a process to discover, and validation as a way to confirm that you're right. So like the way I would ask you is, at what moment in the innovation process does validation change from an explorative inquiry into confident confirmation? Like, at what point in time do you know that you're right?
Yeah. I mean, I think most organizations still treat validation as something of a permission step. So coming back to that checkbox argument that I meant, and not as a learning engine. So really what I guess I'm saying is, like, if validation is just something that you pass, it's no longer learning. It no longer has as much meaning or value. Taseo, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think to be very precise here, validation is, as you said, it's a checkbox of the process. It's not the learning exercise. I think it's exactly what you said. And I mean, another example I just want to bring in here is because there's a study in terms of brushing your teeth. So, and how long would you typically think you brush your teeth? So is it 2 minutes, 3 minutes? Reality is 55 seconds. So if you're now in a part of validating a new toothbrush and realize that, how does it change your decision? Maybe not fundamentally, but in a different scenario with a different validated opportunity before, you would think of, aren't there other ways to have healthy teeth and clean teeth? So it's a different setup. And here, it's both, right? So validation can lead to new insights, but on the other hand, can also either verify or disqualify assumptions. And that's the key part of experimentation. So therefore, yeah, it shouldn't be a checkbox, which it typically is, more like a learning exercise. But again, that comes back to timing, as Simon said, because everyone is pressured. Everyone wants to develop faster, be the first to the market. And yeah, again here, I think storing those learnings and documenting those learnings could be, again, another path for new innovations to be seen, or at least new ideas to be discovered.
Okay. Okay. And so this is now my last question to you two. If you could rewire one reflex inside innovation teams, what would it be?
I have one. Don't fall in love with your ideas, fall in love with the opportunity. I think that kind of echoes what Simon described before, because it's super easy to fall in love with solutions and ideas and features. But if the opportunity is not validated before appropriately, you might invest a lot of money in the wrong direction. So therefore, getting the direction clear up front and being more concerned about market sizes, competitiveness, and ability to respond to a certain opportunity, I think that would save a lot of money and help companies going in a better direction. Yeah, that's my.
Yeah, I think, I kind of rewire the reflex from protecting ideas to protecting learning. So reward teams for killing weak ideas early, not just keeping them alive because it's part of the project. I think there's, a little bit of a case of over-indexing on one type of validation. And I think that can lead to something that Tassilo referenced earlier, this kind of incremental innovation, line extensions, or very familiar formats, a different flavor chocolate bar. And those are kind of low risk improvements. And I guess like a sort of summary I would have for this conversation is that CPG doesn't necessarily have an innovation problem. It's maybe got a bit of a risk management problem. So most, large companies are full of smart people generating ideas. But how do you manage that process? And you've got to remember that, these CPG companies, many of which have been around for decades, that was when launching a new product was incredibly expensive. It had long R&D cycles, big manufacturing commitments. Maybe your retail partners had to be involved. And then we've got stage gate process, multiple validation rounds, financial hurdles to get over. That was the old way. The new way, with new tools, new technologies, AI, of course, has to somehow blend with that cultural or structural setup, because experimentation is now much, much cheaper. So the paradox is that the tools to experiment faster are there, but most organizations still operate as if every product launch was $1 billion bet.
Yeah, if you want to take,
Okay. Go ahead, Tassilo.
for me as well, if there's one key takeaway from that discussion that we are having, it's definitely, it might not look that disruption is real currently, but with now validation being much more accessible, or having the opportunity to develop new products much cheaper, test them on TikTok algorithms and elsewhere, it might be just around the corner. And if you can better validate already where you want to bet on, and if you have more appetite for risk, you're not only fighting the disruption, but you yourself put yourself in a better position for innovation rounds and still dominating the market.
Okay. And it's interesting what you said there's, Simon, like a minute ago, because you're saying that even though, there's all these new methods involving technology, the cost of validation is coming down. It sounds like you're saying that it's almost it's a human cultural problem in terms of these organizations, especially the very large CPG companies, that maybe the way that they operated decades ago is part of the way that they operate, and that there's quite a risk adverseness to it. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say a cultural problem per se. I think the culture of innovation is something that a lot of companies are investing heavily in. But I do think structurally, they're not agile or nimble enough to make best use of new capabilities. I think there's still a little bureaucratic red tape that's stopping people doing what they want. A lot of the innovation professionals that I speak to are some of the most forward-thinking, experimental individuals, but they're working in a constrained structure.
Okay, I see. So it's more the structure and governance type of challenge. Okay. So before I wrap up, let me ask you, Tassilo and Simon, is there any final thoughts? Any last things you want to say on this topic or related to the white paper?
I'm looking forward to the white paper coming out. I think we're going to share that tomorrow across Trend Hunter and ITONICS. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. Like, I think there are some great innovations coming out of CPG. I really do. And I don't want to paint a negative picture at all here. But I think there's more that could be done. And I think there's more that will be done. And there are certain changes structurally, technologically, psychologically, that need to occur in order to make people better at finding ideas and executing on them.
Exactly. And I think that's also the key point, thinking about how to develop further processes, structures. And I think the white paper also makes some strong cases here in terms of the different validation techniques that are just emerging. So AI validation, digital validation, behavior validation. So there's really some strong, interesting cases that point into a different direction of how validation is done, but then also how new products are built. And I was really fascinated to work on that piece and discovering how innovation management practices are changing also in the consumer goods industry, and it's important to just keep up the pace.
Okay, great. Okay, so we started this conversation talking about air fryers, and now we've gone speaking about internal politics, risk, governance, and seeing validation as a genuine inquiry, not just as a tick box exercise. To the audience, I want to say, if anything that we discussed here felt a bit too familiar or what you experience in your organization, I think our new white paper is definitely worth a read and has lots of useful guidance on validation methods. We'll drop the link in the comments, and if you registered, it'll land in your inbox tomorrow. So thank you, Simon and Tassilo, and thank you to everyone for joining.